share the work and do the work. And what we're committed to. So each of us here is here because we want to be more authentic in our lives, and we give that gift to ourselves and others. Here we want kindness, you know, as we share our stories and do the work, to be kind and compassionate with one another, and obviously confidential. Our stories are our own to tell, and so we can tell our own, but we keep others confidential. We hold that trust. So the Cultivating Resilience today is going to be based on the work of Brené Brown. She is a research professor at the University of Houston. She spent the last 2 decades studying courage, vulnerability, shame, and empathy. She is an author of 5 #1 New York Times bestsellers, and she has 2 of the most watched TED Talks on TED.com. So this is where our poll comes in. I'm just really curious, you know, how much do you know of her work? How much have you seen, read, and done the work of Brené Brown? So in this poll, you'll get a chance to indicate whether you've seen her TED Talk, you know, read any of her books, maybe attended a workshop, maybe the online courses. She's had Gifts of Imperfection and others. Maybe all of the above. So you can choose any one of those, and then if it's all of the above, just select all of the above. You would be considered a super fan of Brené Brown, which I consider myself too. And then lastly is just, no, I'm not familiar with her work, and that would be why you're here as well, is to learn more. So let's go ahead and put that poll out there. And I will just wait to hear as the results come in. There is one other book kind of missing from those. Those are her 5 top New York Times bestsellers. Her very first one, I Thought It Was Just Me, is not there. But that really was the one that kicked off all of this succession of books and learning. So, interested to know, do we have, Rosemary, are you there? Are you able to look at the poll, or wait a sec? Okay.
I think we're having a difficulty.
Yeah, I see there's a different poll here. What's the greatest issue your clients are facing right now is what I see when I click poll. Okay. If we don't get to it soon, that's all right. It was really out of curiosity. Also just want to sort of know what the level of familiarity is with her work. I mean, she's really out there, and all of you being coaches and steeped in this work of a helping professional, I'm pretty sure you've encountered her in some ways, and I expect a lot of you have dug a little deeper into her work.
Maggie, I will enable the second post in 1 minute. So if you want, you can give a chance after I clear it up. Okay. I'll notify you.
Okay, great, thanks. So while we're waiting for that to get loaded up, I just kind of want to do an overview, sort of what's coming up on our 1.5 hours together today. We're going to be talking about resilience, as I said, and we really want to look at what is the myth and what's the truth. And that's really important to understand what we're trying to create for ourselves and in ourselves, as well as with our clients. And then we're going to rely pretty heavily on the work of Rising Strong. So that was one of her books, and there's a whole curriculum that I lead in terms of a workshop. This is around our stories of struggle. So we're going to dive into that, and particularly looking at you know, the struggles we're having within this pandemic time. Because when we can kind of step into them and move through them, that's where we grow and flex that resilience muscle. So Rising Strong is also, actually, if you've read Dare to Lead, a lot of the work from Daring Greatly and Rising Strong has kind of been reworked for the work context. So if a lot of you are executive coaches, you know, working in that realm, that book sort of packages it all, and the stories are very specific to workplace issues, and so you can look there. But the thing is, Rising Strong is a process and a practice that applies whether it's in your personal life or professional life. So the steps are the same, and working through is pretty much the same. Then we're going to rumble with emotions. That's her term, or the Rising Strong term. It's the reckoning, the rumble, and the revolution. And so the rumble is sort of as it sounds. We're going to look at emotions that are hard, and we're going to dig into them. And I've chosen 3. There's about not quite a dozen in the whole process, but in terms of what's relevant for this time, I think shame, grief, and anxiety could be the themes that we're seeing in our stories emerge. And then finally, we want to sort of find the learning in that story, really dig into it and rewrite it so it reflects that learning, greater clarity, greater perspective. And lastly, we want to look at practicing self-compassion. That is absolutely a big piece of being resilient. And so, I mean, that alone could be a webinar and then some. But I want to be able to touch on all of those things. As I said, this is from a workshop and curriculum that takes about 16 hours to get through. So an hour and a half, you're going to get a taste of it, get an opportunity to really dive in. And no matter whether you know a lot or a little, I really encourage you to experience this for yourself. So have a pen and paper, because I want you to be working on some stories to sort of jot down what your struggle is, and maybe be able to use this opportunity to sort of move through a little bit and apply this process that we're about to learn. So I want you to be willing to come and reflect and explore and kind of get curious in this process.
The poll is ready.
Okay, fantastic. So let's throw the poll out there, and if you can all respond.
Yep, it is on.
Great. So if the first 4, you're like 2 or 3 out of 4, just choose the ones that you've seen. If it's all of the above, you don't have to press anything else, just all of the above. And then not familiar with her work would be obviously just select 1. This is great. So we're getting there. Okay, so by far, all of you have seen the TED Talks, which is fantastic. That's a great foundation for this work and kind of understanding where we're coming at as we dive into this. Her books, over half of you have read at least one of her books, and some of you have even done workshops and online courses. So what's great is that I would say the majority of you haven't actually dug into the work yourself and done some of these practices. So I'm excited to be able to show you this and have you step into that. And we do have a few super fans on there, almost 20% of you. So welcome. I'm in that club too. Anyway, so let's end that. Oh.
Yeah, done.
Share the results. Did everybody get to see that? Okay. All right. Let's dive in. And the first thing I want to address is a myth, or the myths of resilience. So when we think of resilience, and maybe more when our clients do, because a lot of us have been doing this work for a long time and we get the difference, but often it's seen as being strong, being sort of indestructible, even sort of bulletproof in the face of adversity. And that's why I liked our Wonder Woman and Superman, because those are kind of the images of indestructible. Another myth is that resilience means that we muscle through the struggle. We don't let it bring you down. Toughen up are some of the words that we are told when we're in a struggle. Be strong. So very much this idea of strength in a kind of very, as I say, muscling through way. The other thing is that we hear a lot about resilience being a bouncing back. So there's adversity, it stretches us, maybe like a rubber band, and bouncing back. But that's a myth, because when we develop resilience, when we cultivate it in our lives, we don't just we stretch, but we don't just return to the same place, the same shape and form. In fact, we kind of grow from it. It's more like kind of doing that, sending it on its way. So we stretch and then we move. So yeah, resilience is about, there's a change going on. There's not this strengthening up or armoring up, actually. So this is part of the myth of resilience, is that a lot of people feel that in order to get through a tough time, that they need to armor their heart. And in terms of what that looks like, things like perfecting, as Rosemary shared, I call myself a recovering perfectionist. So I'm always having to watch that my intention is to get everything perfect. It sort of goes beyond excellence. And for those of you who are perfectionists, you realize that it can just drive you crazy. And it's a burden, a shield that we carry to protect ourselves from being seen with our mess and our flaws and our humanness. So perfecting is a big thing. performing. Often when we rely on our roles, our titles, who we are, we're kind of performing a role. We're not allowing ourselves to be truly seen. And just a quick example of that, I recently came back from a holiday, landed in Toronto Pearson Airport, stood in that long kind of snaking line towards the customs officer. And when I got up there and I handed my forms and such, he sort of checked them off, asked the usual kind of official questions. And when he handed back my passport, he said, "Welcome home." And I loved that. I just loved that it was a point of connection. It just felt really like he was stepping out of that official role. And so I feel like it was a person who was willing to kind of be authentic or real in that moment. So that meant a lot to me. Pretending is another one that we do. We pretend that we're okay with everything, is a typical one. So the pieces of armor, we can just keep adding them. You'll have a bunch that you will start to recognize for yourself. But being a knower is really important to us when we're trying not to be seen in our imperfections. We want to get it right. And so we want to have the answers. Being cool, oh my goodness, such a piece of armor. I was terrible at this at school, so I either got bullied or I was kind of the nerd. But you know, being cool is a way of not being seen. It's hiding behind the sunglasses and that cool stance. Being a yes person, that's part of pretending. That's sort of saying yes when you really mean no. And underneath that armor, resentment grows. So when we're not our authentic self, it doesn't, we don't sort of just muscle through and these emotions go away, they go deeper. And I think as coaches, you know this all too well in working with people. Being an expert, getting those credentials, and to a point, obviously they're very important, but the more letters we need behind our name or the more expertise, we're sometimes just trying to put up a bigger and bigger wall and protect ourselves, again, from being wrong or mistaken. Busy. So that's a good piece of armor. That's usually making productivity part of who we are and keeping at bay any of our emotions and our struggles. We just keep going. And in control. Of course, that's part of perfecting, is certainly being in control. In fact, all of these are a way to try and manage what we're doing and how people perceive us in order to not slip up. So none of this represents resilience. This armored heart, this is a hardening, whereas resilience, a really important distinction will be, and I'll get there in a second, not avoiding, because the myth is that, you know, hear no evil, see no evil, say no evil. Resisting. Resilience is not resistance. Denying and hiding. So these are all the ways that we aren't becoming more resistant, we're becoming more rigid, unmovable. And that is just simply not what resilience is. The thing about resilience is we can see someone and really admire the way they are in their life. And it certainly can come across as confidence. And we sort of feel like that person looks strong. What we don't know or what we haven't seen is them going through the tough time and rising from that. And so let's not be fooled. It's not that kind of strong stance. It is actually confidence, but well earned because we've gone through the tough time. So the truth about resilience is that it actually demands vulnerability and courage in our lives. And so that's an opening. That's sort of a taking off of the pieces of armor around our hearts. I mean, I'm not sure if any of us can truly be completely unarmored, but we work at it and we notice what's coming between us and connection with others, what is getting in our way as we try and sort of hide, you know, in who we are. So this is a quote probably most of you have seen before. Vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, creativity, empathy, authenticity. It's everything we want in our lives. Intimacy, connection. I actually prefer to use the word doorway because I feel like vulnerability, we have to move through. We have to choose to open that door and walk through vulnerability. And on the other side is always these great things. And every day we'll be walking through that door of vulnerability, and maybe multiple times a day. So resilience is accepting risk, uncertainty, emotional exposure, all in the service of our purpose and our values. And that's really what courage looks like. it's moving toward the pain, softening into it, not hardening against it when we fall. And then resilience is about getting back up. And this process we're going to go through is, it's not simply, you know, jumping up, I'm fine, dusting myself off. Nope, no one saw that. No one saw my trip on the sidewalk, and pretending it didn't happen and hurting a lot. This is actually getting up and noticing the bruises, the pain, the hurt, the dirt, and helping ourselves heal through that, through a process. So the thing about resilience, being vulnerable, being courageous, is that there's what we call the physics of vulnerability. So when we choose to live a life where we're vulnerable, authentic, we're going to fall in the service of that. So if you're brave enough, often enough, we will fall. This is the physics of vulnerability. So we're vulnerable, we fall, we lean into it, we learn, and we get back up. I prefer this image, actually. I think it makes a lot of sense. That's what the physics of vulnerability looks like. So this guy is out on a limb, I think in the service of some good food. His compatriots are on the dry ground, and they're all lying down, but he's willing to climb that tree and put himself out there. But does that not look like gravity's going to have its way with him, if not now, at some point? And so that's what vulnerability looks and feels like for each of us. It's sort of being out on that limb. Will it hold us? Will it not? And the reason, now the thing is, you got to get really clear on the reason that you went out on that limb. And we'll talk about values in a second, because otherwise you'd be saying, I'm not going out on that limb. Why would I do that? That looks scary, and I really don't want to fall and hurt myself. Let's talk about, though, that you choose to go out on the limb. You choose to live with some courage. And so then you're down on your face. How do we get back up from this? First of all, we have to notice whenever anything is going on with us, a fall, a feeling, sort of a failure, something not working out, maybe criticism, we have to notice, first of all, that we're emotionally hooked. And I know that that sounds easier than it is, but we're pretty programmed to try and dodge those bullets by projecting it elsewhere, blaming other people, getting impatient with our kids, or our partners. There's lots of ways that we don't actually look inwards and say, okay, what's going on with me? And I'm spilling it out into other areas of my life. So got to know that we're emotionally hooked. We have to have the courage to move towards the pain, not away from it. So we have to say, okay, I have to stop here and actually look at this, because this is getting out of hand. I'm spilling it elsewhere. I need to be accountable and responsible for my own emotions, my emotional energy, and what I'm bringing. So this is where, as we move through the process, then we need to identify that struggle, and what are we willing to, and being willing to walk into it with curiosity in particular, because, again, we want to rush to answers. So we may be busy blaming someone else for a problem that has happened, or a struggle, or blaming ourselves, kicking ourselves when we're down. None of that really helps us get resilient. So we need to get really curious. We need to say, okay, something's happened. This didn't work out the way I wanted it to. What's going on here? What do I need to learn? What do I need to understand about my story? Whether it's about the situation, about the other person in it. And we're going to get to examples. So I know this sounds a little bit kind of not academic, but sort of just not well grounded yet in story. But and then I also have to look at myself. What role did I play in this? What is mine to own? And learn more. So this is really key, and I've got just one quick slide. All of you as coaches know this, that we need to know our values, and I'm quite sure that you're done it yourself. You know your own values, and it's work that you do with your clients. And this is really important. We need to know our guiding principles. We need to have that compass in the service of being brave, and also very much in the service of getting up again when we've fallen, because we have to know that it mattered to make ourselves vulnerable. We have to know that it's kind of worth that uncertainty, that risk, because we believe in something that's really important. So cultivating resilience is both a process, so you can see we move through each of these stages, and it's a practice. We go through this again and again whenever we get emotionally hooked, whenever we're dealing with something. And so, we as coaches, and I'm certain that we're encouraging, leading, guiding our clients to live with authenticity, their true self, to live with vulnerability, as uncomfortable as it is. It's really where they're going to find all those things in life that they want, joy and belonging and love and empathy, and to do that with courage. So that's our starting point. And we're living in our values, which is what allows us to be authentic. Then we do something that there's a fall. So here's an example. A young woman has an art exhibit going on. One night she has asked her best friend to be there, to be beside her, to kind of help her, because it's her first one, and so she's nervous. And then on the night of the gallery opening, her friend is a no-show. She sends a quick text. She says, "I love you. You've got this. Sorry I can't be there, but you'll be fabulous." And that's it. And so there's this sense that, wow, I've really been let down by my friend. She seems flippant, actually. But this really mattered to me. I wanted her here. I needed her here. She knew that. And you're kind of in a fall. Like you're in this kind of face down. I don't have my person beside me. She's in this sense of kind of lost and feeling really hurt. But she's kind of, at this point, not really gone into that story yet or tried to understand more about it. She's just making assumptions. She's like, I can't believe she was a no-show. She promised me. There's a lot of hurt there. So the story that she's making up is, this didn't matter to her. Maybe I don't matter to her. My art, maybe I'm not a real artist. I'm just kind of a hack. So all this kind of internalizing and sort of reading. I mean, how many of us have not got a text and sort of tried to create a story around what's going on because it's a surprise or it's something unexpected, and there's been a shift for us. So the next day, she's still upset with her best friend for being a no-show. And what she does, though, instead of ignoring her friend, she decides to ask her. This is the brave part. This is the part where we really want to open up space and learn to do this. So she gets curious. She actually asks her friend, "What happened? Where were you? I needed you." And she might actually ask it still conveying her hurt, because we do that. We, in our own confusion, we can even convey the fact that this person has betrayed us or let us down. So she's able to do that with her friend. And what she gets back was kind of shifted everything for her. So her friend writes back, "I found out last night that my mom has been diagnosed with breast cancer. I didn't want to tell you. I didn't want to ruin your evening. I didn't want to take away from the joy of it. I want to see you today. Let's get together." Now the story is totally different. It's a story of caring, her friend caring for her friend putting her first, actually, and wanting the best for her. It was the opposite of betrayal. It was a kind of loyalty to her. And so this is her moving through. And then the learning part is first of all, trust. Do I trust this best friend? Actually, I do. And I need to affirm my trust for her that we've established. And so I need to know that if she's not going to be there for me, there's going to be a really good reason. And I have to be willing to also be there for her and reach out to her. Also learning, I got a lot of shame here. I got a lot of questions about who I am, my competency as an artist. And so I need to really look at that. And I need to speak to myself with some self-compassion. There's things I need to now do to be present with this and to learn from this and to do differently. So that's just sort of a quick sort of taking you through the story process and what it looks like and how we move through a fall. We identify our stories and how we're being hooked, and then we get curious, because we have such a habit of filling in with assumptions. And I'm probably one of the best story makers. I make up stories in my head all the time. So I'm aware of that. Got to get curious. Stop that flow of energy that happens when we're in that fall. So the reckoning, it's that part where, as we've said, there's the fall, and the reckoning is, what's the story I'm telling myself when I'm rumbling, or I've got a story and it's hurting, it's hard. What is it that I'm making up? And so we need to get curious. It's actually called in the work that we do, it's called the shitty first draft. the SFD. And this is a term that Anne Lamott, the writer, uses as a writer herself, and recognizing that just get it down on paper. You know what? It's not going to be the final story, but just get down what you're thinking, feeling. And if our shitty first draft is really that, it would be unedited, unfiltered. It would certainly be an honest expression of how we're feeling in that moment, and possibly unshareable. Pretty sure that she didn't share with her best friend that she thought she completely betrayed her, you know, and kind of carried on like that. So it's kind of, maybe we're not going to show someone because this is just how we're feeling, and we've got to learn some more. That'll be a later step. Once we identify what our story is, then we go into the rumble. And that is, boy, I'm really hooked by this emotion, anger, upset, sadness, because always under anger, there's other emotions. Obviously, it's only a secondary emotion. So what's under that anger and that sense of betrayal, what's going on, and how am I offloading this hurt on others? I talked about that we tend to let it just sort of fly when we're not really looking at our story closely. You'll know that you have a really bad first draft, really shitty first draft, when in your story you've got villains, someone's just the worst person there. You've got victims. Often it can be ourselves, you know, I can't believe this happened to me. Or we've got heroes. So some kind of, you know, story that really kind of puts everybody in a bit of a place, a hole, a spot where, okay, you're all bad, I'm all hurt, you're all good, the hero. And as we know, nobody is all good, bad, or heroic. So it's a very skewed story for sure. In the rumble, then, what we want to do is we want to learn more. We need to understand about ourselves or that other person. And so this is the really vulnerable and softening part that I talked about, opening your hearts to the struggle and leaning in. So getting curious, looking at what's been going on, and being willing to really sort of feel it, hear it, and receive it. In the rumble, in this work that we do with Rising Strong, there are this whole range of emotions that have been identified that we work through. So shame, anxiety, grief, vulnerability, forgiveness, criticism, trust, and living big. Living big is a great one. I'm not actually going to touch on it today, but it's a bit of a life-changing one as well. It's about boundaries, integrity, and generosity when we're dealing with betrayal. But so today we're going to focus on shame, anxiety, and grief. Usually there's shame in our stories. That's a very common human experience. So definitely wanted to touch on that. There's certainly you know, some shame in our young artist's story, and another story I'm going to share with you. Then anxiety and grief. And I put these out there because of this time that we're going to be looking at, the struggles that are specific to this time. I've definitely heard a huge rise in anxiety. There's been a lot of talk of grief as well. So we're going to rumble with those. This is where I want to really encourage you to do the work for yourself. Take that pen and paper. And I want you to start thinking of, you know, this time while we're, you know, socially distancing, we're in isolation, there's struggle going on. We know that. And so what is your struggle? What are you telling yourself? Or what's one of them? You know, whether it's within your household and others there, it's, you know, put a lot of strain on relationships. There's a lot to work through and to negotiate. So what's going on there? Or maybe as a coach with your clients, and maybe clients dropping off and not responding to you, what are the stories that you might be making up around all of that? What's the struggle? And I also want you to consider the hard emotions in this. So let me just share with you while you're thinking on that, and I encourage you to continue just sort of mulling that over and thinking on that. I want to share with you my story of struggle in this time of pandemic. And it starts off with what I think a lot of you are quite familiar with, not only obviously in this context, but in now the family context. This is my extended family. We're on Zoom. It was something that I wanted to set up within a week or two because we just weren't seeing each other. My parents are, you know, obviously they're in their 80s or elderly. We all wanted to be able to say hi to them and connect with each other. Anyway, so I came up with this idea, shared it with the family, made sure my parents had the technology all installed and ready to go. And And so we jumped on Zoom, and we have been doing and continue to do these family calls. And so for me, it was really born out of a value that I have of connection, obviously, connection, family. And so it was really important to me. So we're chugging along. I think we're at about our 6th week of Zoom calls. We're meeting on Sunday nights at 7:30. And I get a text from my niece. And I'm just going to read it to you and tell you how this played out. So my niece texts me. She says, "Hey, Aunt Margs, quick question. Any chance we could adjust the timing of our family calls? I have a weekly Sunday meeting that conflicts with our 7:30 time slot. Any chance we could do it earlier, maybe even in the afternoon? If 7:30 is the best time for everyone else, then don't worry about me. I just thought I would check." So I responded, "Hey, sweetie, let's move it if we can. We really want you to be there. Maybe Mondays at 7:30. I'll send out a request to see if I can reschedule." So in that, I was really wanting to, meet her request. I wanted to, maybe there was a bit of people pleasing in that, but it was really important for me as well, just to have her as part of the call. So I send out an email to the family, followed up with text because not everybody checks their emails. And so I'm saying, "Hey guys, what do you think of moving it to Mondays at 7:30? Bunch were like, "Yeah, it works." In fact, pretty much everybody did. But I got this text from my cousin. It says, "I can make that work, but you'll be missing seeing the faces of my cherubs," his angels, his 3 boys, 8 and twins who are 10. So thinking, okay, well, now I don't want to be sort of choosing between his kids, my cousin's kids. Oh, I can indicate who my cousin is. There he is. Okay, so he's the one that texted and said, "Yeah, I can do it, but my kids can't." And his kids go back and forth between his place and their mother's place. So I'm feeling like, okay, what do we do here? I come up with a suggestion. I think, okay, let's do a once a month. We'll do the Sunday so his kids can join because they come on weekends. And then we'll do Mondays for the rest of the time so that my niece can be on the call. And I did kind of make a little joke that her attention span is a little longer. Little wink there. I don't hear from my cousin, but everything seems okay. We get on the call on Monday night at 7:30 as planned, and my cousin's a no-show. He's not there. Everyone else is there. And I kind of think, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what happened to my cousin. You can hear that I'm already kind of thinking, uh-oh, maybe I insulted him. Maybe I hurt him. Maybe I suggested to him, or there was some suggestion that his kids didn't matter as much. So I start making up a story about this. And I think, well, maybe I should give him a quick call and see what's going on. But before I can do that, my big brother, right here, gives me a call the next morning. And he has actually started making up his own story, but he's as concerned as I am. Our cousin didn't show, maybe that whole rescheduling thing. And his story is even harder. It's like, he doesn't think he's as important in the family, really part of the family because he's extended, and we really want to make sure, here's the thing. This is my big brother. And for any of you, as you know, when you get into that family context, any sort of progress you've done on yourself, any sort of enlightenment you've had about who you are and how you were created kind of goes out the window. And I'm back being that little sister. This is my big brother, and it felt kind of bossy. And I really felt like he was coming down a little hard. I felt like I was being told off. So it's like I had fall part 1 when I noticed that my cousin wasn't on the call, and I'm getting worried about that. And then the biggest fall was this whole thing with my brother calling. And so that's where I was. I was kind of face down. I wanted to do this thing out of love for family and connection. And now I'm in this fall. So I noticed that as we're talking, that I'm kind of emotionally hooked. I'm kind of blaming and defending, and my heart rate goes up. My voice is raised. I'm also speaking a little faster. So I start to notice that happening. I will continue this story. So there's my fall. There's kind of like, what I wanted to create, be a little vulnerable, do that. The family was thrilled with it. I got a lot of kind of affirmation that we had this weekly family Zoom call. And then this what we call inciting incident. Something shifted, something changed, and then trouble ensued. So I am going to share more of that story with you a little bit later on, but that's the kind of thing I want you to tune into for yourself. What do you have? What can you recall of a moment where it all just got kind of messed up and you were struggling? So what I want to do, because I've encouraged you to really come up with a story of struggle during this time, being at home, being with kids, working through with clients, losing speaking engagements, and all that's gone and shifted in your life. I want to give you some time now. We're going to give 5 minutes, and you're going to be broken up into groups of 3, because I think that that's, you know, a good number to really be able to process and share well and get through within 5 minutes. So we're going to send you off into these groups. Share your story of struggle, fall, obviously in the service of being brave and doing the work you want to do and being the person you want to be. What's going on? Yeah, I think we're good.
Yep, you can go ahead.
All right, welcome back, everybody. So now that you have your story of kind of fall down, the struggle, being emotionally hooked, I want to start moving through some of those emotions that we want to rumble with. And I've, as I said, I've chosen 3. Shame is the first one, because honestly, it's just such a human, universal affect. We all struggle with shame. And it's that feeling of that sort of intensely painful feeling or experience of believing we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. So that idea of actually being on the outside is what leads us to all that armoring up. We're trying to hide the stuff that we think people might sort of find out about us and then toss us out of the group, toss us aside and make us feel like we don't belong, or ourselves feeling like we don't belong. A couple of quick things to differentiate around shame versus guilt. Shame is I am bad. It's very much a focus on the self. It's who I am as a person. That makes it very much an identity, and it makes it very entrenched, something we can't move or change. Second is guilt, very different. This is I did something bad. I made a mistake. And it's based on our behavior. I'm going to talk a little bit more about these 2 in a second. But there is a big difference. We need to tune into our voice, our inner voice, and what it's actually saying to us. It's the work that you as coaches, I'm sure, do with your clients and have done yourself around gremlins. Taming the gremlin is one area. We call them saboteurs. It's that voice that really tries to, at its best, keep us safe. At its worst, prevent us from showing up for who we are. And so we want to tune into that voice and what it's telling us when we're in that kind of face down fall position, we're in that emotional struggle. So shame is highly correlated with, this is the I am bad, I am a failure, I'm a loser, I am whatever. It's correlated with depression, anxiety, aggression, bullying, violence, food, eating disorders, and suicide. So huge mental health issues when we see ourselves as inherently bad people, a bad person, as though we were made wrong. We just, we're different from the rest, that we somehow missed out on being made well. We're wrong. Everyone else, often it's an isolating thing. Everyone else is doing great. Everyone else is great. I'm not. I'm bad. So guilt, when we talk about focusing on our behaviors, what we did, it's inversely related to all of those things. So it's actually really highly correlated with well-being. It is a highly adaptive response to something that's gone wrong, because we're actually saying, yeah, I did something bad, wrong, there was a failure, but I can do differently. I can learn from it, and I can choose differently next time. So it is associated with bringing more love, joy, belonging, all the things we really want, creativity, empathy, and authenticity. Because again, it's the softening in to the hard stuff. It's walking through that door of vulnerability when we've messed up or we're in that emotionally hooked place. It's kind of a place where we're giving ourselves some grace to walk through and rumble with the hard emotions. So be really aware of how you're speaking to yourself. When you look at this story, what is it you're saying about who you are, and what your struggle is about. The not enough list can be really long. This is just a sampling of not good enough, perfect enough, smart enough, rich enough, thin enough, cool enough, powerful enough, perfect enough, extraordinary enough, enough. It goes on. So, and we'll go back to my story and I'll kind of share with you where I landed with that one. But in your own story, what is the not enough? What are you telling yourself that you have in terms of that there's an inadequacy? What is your inadequacy that you're telling yourself? And get really clear on that. So the kinds of questions, as you're looking at your story, what you've written down, your struggle, ask how shame shows up there. Is it perfectionism? Is it comparison? That is the thief of joy. The minute you look at what someone else is doing and what you're doing, and the minute you take your eyes off of your stuff, the not enoughness just gets really loud, the volume on that. So look and see if that's happening. And that'd be very easy for each of us as coaches to think someone else over there is, on social media promoting their next program, their next online thing, they're doing great, which we don't know how they're doing, but I'm doing so poorly. So that kind of thing, comparison, and as I say, the not good enough, fill in those blanks with your story. What's going on there in terms of your sense of inadequacy or not enoughness. So back to my story, and for me it is rumbling with shame. So where we left off, I was emotionally hooked on that phone call with my brother. I'd already been feeling kind of worried about my cousin and his reasons for not showing, but I got blaming and I got defensive. So kind of both things were going on. I was trying to stop what was coming at me and trying to throw it in other directions. So one of my reactions was my cousin should have replied. If once a month on Sundays with his kids wasn't enough, which was my solution. Let's do 3 Mondays and 1 Sunday so we can get his kids when they're at home with him and see them. Well, if that wasn't enough, he should have replied or asked for another change. Also, I don't know the schedule with his kids, so maybe I've suggested something isn't workable. I wish he'd tell me, because again, I got no reply after we sort of set up this alternative approach to accommodate my niece. And then I'm like, I'm just trying to be helpful. There's like total defensiveness. First 2 are blaming, second is defensiveness. And then I went so far as saying, you know what, maybe someone else should do this. So I want to just walk away from this situation being the one that, sets it up every single week, gives people reminders, sends the link, gets on before everybody else hosts it. Anyway, so I'm like, somebody else can do this. So as you can see, really hooked and feeling horrible. And so my rumble was with shame. I'm insensitive and I'm thoughtless was kind of what's going through my mind, because I did this without double checking with my cousin. Maybe I was just seeming too flippant and offering this, and it wasn't good for him. So anyway, I must be insensitive and thoughtless, and it's certainly that really ramped up with my brother's call, because again, it felt very much a little bossy, what I need to do and what I need to remember about my cousin and where he's at in his life and all those things. So I needed to get curious. Why was my cousin a no-show? I mean, that had come to mind already, but with this call with my brother, I had to go there. I was like, I got to follow up with him, see what's happening. And what's the story my brother is making up too? Because as I say, he went a little further with it about how my cousin might be feeling. And so that just, increased, as I say, my own shame and my own struggle and our conversation, our struggle, and what he was saying. Because certainly I didn't want to be a person who was sending those kinds of hurtful messages to my cousin. To be continued. So now I've gotten into sort of the rumbling with shame, and it's sort of come out that I really feel like I don't want to be that insensitive, thoughtless person. In fact, one of my values is thoughtfulness, kindness. And so, boy, that really hurts when you think you've acted in a way or that you are being in a way that is counter to your own values. The second one that I want to kind of point to each of you to look at with your own story is rumbling with anxiety. And as I said, this time is certainly a time of increased anxiety for many, many people. And so we've got to look at what's going on in our story that may reflect our anxiety. And this isn't really so much disordered anxiety as kind of on that continuum of sort of worry, stress, and then it's sort of ramping up anxiety. And Harriet Lerner identified 2 ways that we respond to anxiety, one of 2 ways. And these are sort of patterned ways that we kind of learn. Maybe it's birth order in our families, maybe just how we're wired, but overfunctioning and underfunctioning. So looking at our story of anxiety, are we overfunctioning or underfunctioning? So if we're overfunctioning, and I'm a classic overfunctioner, I mean, I was the one that set up the Zoom call and got in there and wanted to make it all happen, feeling like really need to connect. So addressing that kind of anxiety. But then I'm advising, rescuing, taking over. If you see any of this in your story, that would be overfunctioning, micromanaging, getting into other people's business, but not looking inward. So do you find yourself going to that place of really wanting to control because everything feels so out of control? So look at that. And then the underfunctioner is someone who gets less competent under stress. They may appear lazy. They let others take care of them. These are a great match. The overfunctioner and the underfunctioner often live together. And I think certainly as a parent, we see this dynamic a lot with our own kids. I will confess to have been a bit of an overfunctioning parent, and then the kids underfunction, and I'm resentful, and they don't understand why I'm asking them to do things because, I really haven't before. I've done it all myself. Anyway, so that's a dynamic that goes on, and that's another story of struggle. So an underfunctioning individuals can often become kind of the focus of worry or concern. So, they're sleeping late and long, and they're on the couch all day. Maybe there's depression going on there. What's happening? And so you can see that sort of feeds into the overfunctioner. It's going to sort of keep trying to make up for the underfunctioner. So this is maybe what it looks like. I kind of like sort of reversing traditional gender roles, and this could certainly be anyone's household, but there's the overfunctioner who's managing, juggling everything, and then there's the couch surfer. Now we could say that she's actually getting a great big dose of self-compassion, and this is just her moment, and so we applaud that. But truthfully, if she's doing that all day, she's the underfunctioner, and her partner is overfunctioning by taking on everything. So looking at your own story, diving into anxiety and what's showing up. First of all, are you typically an overfunctioner or underfunctioner? Figure that out. We can kind of drill down a little more in this, because we will overfunction with some people and not others, and we will underfunction with some people and not others. So trying to figure out when you do that and with whom. And what can I do when I'm feeling this way? And I had someone ask me, obviously that overfunctioner, this was an overfunctioning parent, wanted to know, how do I get my underfunctioning kids or partner or both to kind of step in? I'm doing everything. I'm still holding down the job that I had, and I'm looking after the household that's become messier, and there's more meals to make every day and to clean up after it. And so I'm feeling resentful. And that takes, first of all, owning the fact that you are an overfunctioner, and that's your role in it. Simply being, blaming and upset at the others for not doing their part isn't quite fair, because you're part of the dynamic. I end up being part of the dynamic. And it's having hard conversation with the underfunctioner. And that conversation is trying to be really kind of vulnerable and authentic, and not blaming, criticizing, because that's the most demotivating thing out there. But it's trying to call that person up and what they have to offer to the household, and stepping into a new place and space with this whole new reality. So that's a kind of hard conversation to have, but that's how you can sort of start to work through that dynamic. Or if it's a team member at work, or your client's dealing with a team member at work, is to affirm the person who's under functioning that they have something to give, that they have they're capable and they have an offering. And so there's an affirmation there. The third emotion that I wanted to have you sort of look at and see if it's going on in your story, and I'm hearing a lot of this these days, is the rumbling with grief. Grief is about loss, longing, and feeling lost. We'll break it down into 3. And if you're not actually looking at that emotion at this time, I suspect that you're feeling more disconnected than ever, more isolated in your grief. Fortunately, I'm finding that a lot of people are sharing this struggle and the grief that they're experiencing. They're sharing it online. You actually see it kind of out there in sort of vloggers are talking about it, and our friends on Facebook. And so I think there is space actually to allow yourself to move into this. So looking at your story, keeping that in mind, here's some elements of grief as we've discussed them. So loss, this is a kind of grief that creates losses within us that reach beyond our awareness. So something we really kind of took for granted. So we feel as if we're missing something that was invisible and unknown to us while we had it, and now it's gone. There's sort of that pain there. A routine could be a sense of loss. I would thrive on this routine of getting up and getting, if I had children, kids off to school. And anyway, everything had kind of a time and a space, and it propelled me through the day. I don't have that. And so there's loss in that. And so get really clear about what is the loss, what's missing for you that, as I say, may have been invisible or unknown. And now has become really known, really present. Longing. It's not so much a conscious longing for things. It's an involuntary yearning for wholeness, for understanding, for meaning. And certainly this time has a lot of people reflecting on their values and what's important to them. And there's a kind of longing to understand what's going on here and actually come through it in a way more resilient, more in line with our values, who we are, and what we want to create in our lives. And so there's the opportunity to regain or even simply touch what we've lost. And then feeling lost. I love this picture because it's just the juxtaposition of this guy out in the middle of a field somewhere, or a bit of a wilderness. And that's what it is. It's that I'm in this wilderness. I'm in this place now that I've never been before. Everything looks unfamiliar in my day, or a lot does. And so it's a reorientation. Where am I? It's kind of getting out the compass. And that's physical, emotional, social, certainly social. We've noticed that. Just not being able to connect with others in a real live way. So look in your story. Is there grief going on? Someone I heard describe the grief that comes with even just wearing face masks out in public, being an extrovert, smiles being important, that being a point of connection with people, being so important. And with the masks now, not seeing smiles is just really not only disorienting, but it's a grief, it's a loss. So what have you got going on in terms of grief and loss? Once we rumble with those emotions, we've found we've identified that we're emotionally hooked. We're falling down. We decide we're going to roll up our sleeves and dig into our story, as hard as those emotions are, and we're going to look at them, figure them out, own them. Then we have this, what's called a delta, and it's that place where, like the ocean meets the river, and or the river meets the ocean, and it sort of all mixes and mingles. So what's truth? What's not? What's real? What have I learned? So you're rewriting your story. And in this part, you're really saying, I recognize that I made an assumption there. And then there's maybe conspiracies, confabulations. We're making up stories. So what were those things that I was making up? What's my key learning as all this mixes together? There's some truth, and then I've gotten curious, and now I realize there's some more learning here that I can add to this story, and I can take away a different story. So what is our kind of brave new story? So let me take you back to my story and how it ends. So last time I kind of left us off with me feeling very emotionally hooked, and that was really painful. So I had to get curious. Why was my cousin a no-show? What story is my brother making up? And then so in the service of being curious and wanting to know more, I called my cousin. I just picked up the phone, called him. And here's the missing information. He had a big presentation on Tuesday, the next day from our call. It was a new business presentation. And so work was too demanding. He could not be on the call. All is well. He likes the new plan. He and I are going to keep in touch when he has his kids so that we can actually schedule a call at least once a month when he's got his kids with him. All was well in the world. So what was my learning in this? I needed to be aware, first of all, be aware that I was maybe being a bit of a people pleaser. I might have overpromised to my niece saying, yeah, absolutely, we'll get on that. I was pretty confident we'd be able to move it without a problem. And I recognized that in that I wanted to make her happy. I wanted to be that really good aunt that knows that she's loved and included, which are good things. But I didn't really prepare either of us for the chance of a conflict, of a struggle there. Got to trust my own intuition. So when my cousin wasn't there, you know, I need to circle back as soon as I can. My older brother jumped in pretty quick to call me in the morning, but no, I had an intuition and just needed to follow that because that's what I wanted to do. Listen with curiosity around my brother, and not get defensive or blaming, but just sort of like, you know, there's a lot of energy in what he's saying. Like he was feeling hooked, and there's a story that may not also be in truth or grounded in what's actually happening. And part of my learning was to simply affirm my values, that I'm like, yes, it was really important for me. It is still important that we have this family, this connection together once a week on Zoom. And so I'm not going to abandon that, walk away, give it to someone else. It is important to me, and I'm going to continue to kind of lead that and do the best I can. And authenticity, being authentic through this is really important. And then the last is just giving myself a good dose of self-compassion. Because that's a really important ingredient in this work, as I would say, I'm sure most of you know. All right, so what I want from you now is to do a quick recap of your shitty first draft. I hope you've been taking notes, kind of, you know, intuiting or listening for what your own emotions are there that you have to rumble with in your story. Did you notice shame, anxiety, grief? Are any of those part of it? And what have you learned? So jot those things down. We're going to do another breakout, and the intention is to put you back with the same group of people, same 3, 4, 5 people. And in doing that, you're able to sort of complete this process with the same people who have heard your story of struggle already, and you're able to share that.
So, go ahead.
Fantastic. All right. Welcome back, everybody. So I hope that process, just sort of flexing that muscle of resilience, really, in terms of diving into your story, sharing it, and coming to some learning. I hope that was enlightening and that kind of gave you a good sense of how this process works. The last part, and for us coaches, this is always the really important part. I know that we drive this really home to all of our clients, is the idea of practice, practice, practice. How do we apply this learning? It's kind of like a rinse and repeat, right? So this is called the revolution in Rising Strong. You can see I've kind of put the R a little over. There's a bit of an evolution here. I think it really is a process where we keep working at it, and we mess up and we go back and we realize, oh, I was emotionally hooked. How do I work through that? It doesn't, you know, we're going to get emotionally hooked. We can't avoid that part. And so we've got to give ourselves some grace, but we evolve through this. And that's the way of cultivating our resilience is practicing. So I've just listed a couple of ways that you can try to start thinking about how you're going to make it a daily practice and how you're going to integrate your key learning. The last thing I want to say quickly is about self-compassion. And this is really the superpower of resilient people, is that they treat themselves with kindness. And that here, let me show you what the 3 parts. This is based on Kirsten Neff's work. I'm sure a number of you have heard of her. If you haven't, selfcompassion.org is a great website, lots of free materials, exercises there, meditations and such. She also has a great book out as well called Self-Compassion. Anyway, one of the first that she identifies is self-compassion is self-kindness. It's actually giving ourselves the same kindness that we would give to others, that we would give to a good friend, that is non-judgmental, that is actually empathetic, and that there's self-care in that. So always ask ourselves, would I say this to a friend who is struggling? And, you know, the answer being no, what would you say? How would you treat this friend who's struggling? And treat yourself that way. The second part is common humanity. And this is just getting really clear that we are part of this human race, that having suffering, having those fall down moments, feeling inadequate in them, it's just part of our shared human experience. We are not alone. We are messy, imperfect, and vulnerable human beings. And so we're in this together, literally, both in the pandemic time and a lot of the stuff we're sharing in that struggle, we're feeling it the same. And just in life in general, we're in this together. And so remind yourself, I'm human and I'm imperfect. And the last one around self-compassion is mindfulness. This is really about being aware of our emotions and accepting them, accepting that there's a struggle, and then grounding ourselves in that. And there's lots of different ways that you can do that. You know, certainly yoga, breathing exercises, meditation, all ways of grounding yourself in your body in that moment, in that time, and not allowing yourself to be kind of scattered and everywhere, but coming back to who you are and getting regulated really in your emotions and in yourself, coming back to your own sense of normal as to who you are. So that pretty much wraps up our workshop. Just to review, resilience and wholeheartedness, how I kind of put these two together. There are three aspects. Courage is the first one, that we need to be willing to really dive into those hard stories. When we're struggling, when we're being hooked with emotion, we need to say, okay, I got to stop and I'm going to find the learning here. And that'll allow me to kind of rewrite what's going on, get better clarity in that. We also, as I've just said, we need self-compassion. You know, be kind, be gentle to yourself. And we need connection. So we need to believe that in spite of all of this, these struggles and these fall down moments, we are still worthy of belonging. We're still worthy of connection with others, of being loved. And that's really the important message that we need to give ourselves each and every day. So that sounds really easy. And I know many of you will have heard this. I am imperfect and I am enough. And that's really kind of the mantra. Sounds simple. It's hard. It's a practice. We have to wake up and choose that every single day. And so I hope for you that you will be gentle on yourself in this process, that you will embrace your courage in order to look at these things and know that you will grow through this, that you won't end up bouncing back, but you'll be bouncing forward. You'll be creating something new in yourself and growing your own resilience step by step. Okay. So I do want to check in around any questions. I think
we have one question from Cindy.
Okay, yep. So Cindy asks about equilibrium functioning. What does equilibrium functioning look like, or is it always an infinite sign? Cindy, if you can unmute yourself and just kind of explain that question to me. I'm not sure I quite understand what you're asking.
So I was just, hi Maggie, thank you very much for this amazing session.
Hi, thanks.
Firstly, I was wondering, because you explained it as over-functioning and under-functioning. I was wondering if there is like an infinity sign, that what does the middle part look like when it's actually in equilibrium?
Yes.
And is there even such a thing, like, you know, as an equilibrium of functioning?
I think there is, and it's usually when we're not anxious. So that we're not taking over and pushing aside. And then it also, or under functioning. So there's sort of that normal, but being aware as we get anxious is really moderating ourselves. And so can we perfectly do that in between? Probably not. Can we start to be aware when we're taking over from others, or we're giving away, you know, or not showing up as we should? I think it's a constant tuning in to our awareness. And the sooner we catch that, the sooner we can kind of readjust that as best we can. But it's, again, it's in and of itself is a practice.
Okay,
for sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Okay. Anyone else? Or maybe I'll just hand it back to you, Rosemary.
Sure, thank you. Well, we got a lot of detail and sharing over there of Brené Brown's work and some of your personal experiences. From the chat line, I see that people have enjoyed this session, and possibly, and they will, you know, there will be an application implementation to the learning that's taken place today. I would ask Bashir, could you put the SurveyMonkey evaluation in the chat line, please, so people could have the link? But Maggie, I would say there's a lot of learning we take away from your session, especially on resilience. And one of the things that stood out with me is I've been carrying this big bag on my shoulders, and that's of shame. And now I've learned how to deal with it. And now that I've named it and given it a tag. So thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, participants, for being there and joining us in this event. I look forward to seeing you all at our next event that you will see in our notifications. And go out and enjoy this sunny day.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Have a great one.